Hi everyone, happy Friday. Psychoanalysis Day at Sublation Media, everyone's favourite day. I was joined by Helen Rollins this week. We interviewed Todd McGowan for the second time. We talked about the question of right-wing enjoyment and what the problem with the liberals and the right in enjoyment is. It was a really fascinating episode. Todd's, of course, brilliant, so I really hope you enjoy it. A couple of quick things. Thanks so much to Patreons for supporting us, carrying on supporting us. It means a lot, actually. Elliot and I are doing a different thing for patrons now, as well as the B-sides. We're doing like a sort of mini course in like fundamental psychoanalytic literature. We recorded an episode about Freud's essay, Criminals from a Sense of Guilt, last week. That's available for patrons now for as little as £2. I think it's £2. I don't know what that is in dollars, $3. And we're doing Lacan's Mirror Stage essay next week. So we're no experts really, but we're learning along with you and really enjoying like listening to the patrons' feedback and going through these key psychoanalytic texts with the patrons. So that's brilliant. So yeah, really, really nice to be able to bring you this episode with Todd McGowan. Helen and I really enjoyed doing it. If you want to see more about Helen's work as well, she's a psychoanalytic filmmaker. We interviewed her on Sci-Fi. It's one of the earlier things on the playlist, so please check that out as well. All that stuff in the description, and hope you enjoyed the episode. Yeah, I certainly did. Okay, thanks everyone.
Great. Okay, so I don't know. Let's talk about this left and right enjoyment thing. So, like Todd, Helen, and I had like a little discussion between ourselves about it.
Mm-hmm.
On after your talk on the book launch thing. And I guess, like, I don't know, we wanted to talk to you about, I don't know, I guess we were thinking about, like, whether it's right to sort of think about certain kind of, like, can enjoyment be, like, put into a category like this? Some of it's leftist, some of it's rightist. And it's not quite obviously what you're doing, but you know, I guess what I was thinking about there was this happens a lot with laughter and comedy. Like I did my PhD on comedy and laughter. I know you've obviously written loads of books about that yourself, but like you often see this in like studies of laughter and comedy, right? You get, because of course we're aware like there's reactionary jokes, there's so-called right-wing jokes or whatever, but then of course there's other traditions like say Freud, Bakhtin, like laughter as liberating and so on. So like there's all these different ideas like of whether laughter could serve like progressive or conservative purposes, right-wing or left-wing purposes. But then what you tend to get is like theorists trying to say here, which you know, could be right-wing or whatever, but then there's this good laughter, which is left-wing. And I guess I've always thought that was like a bit of a problem with comedy. I don't think you can sort of have a sort of pure one, which isn't you know, problematic and cruel and evil and so on. So I guess I wondered what you thought about that before we get to enjoyment itself.
Yeah, it actually, I mean, it's kind of the same issue, really, isn't it? Like, I would say, I guess my temptation would be to say the opposite of what you just said. I don't mean to be perverse right off the gate, but I mean, I think, like, to me, even the most reactionary joke has a kernel of maybe emancipatory potential within it. And I think similarly, I mean, this is part of the whole point of the book really is that enjoyment I see as sort of emancipatory in itself, and then it gets taken over by a conservative or reactionary direction that it ends up being put in toward. But I would say the same thing about comedy, really. Like, I mean, I guess the choice is you either, and maybe I'd be interested to hear what you would say about this, but it seems like your theory of comedy is it's one political thing or the other, or you have to analyze each comic bit or each joke as it comes along, right? Like, so a certain joke would be, you know, emancipatory, a certain joke would be conservative, or your theory is it's all one or all the other, or I guess you could have a theory that says it's not political at all, right? And I don't think that seems to be a stretch to say that. So it sounds like your theory is comedy is basically conservative. Even the most seemingly emancipatory, that's what you're saying, right? Even the most seemingly emancipatory joke has this conservative core to it. Yeah. So I think, I mean, it's interesting because like Alenka Zupancic, Alain Badiou, like Slavoj, I don't know what his theory is, but their theory is the opposite. Their theory is comedy is emancipatory, and it's only when it gets detoured in a way that's not, it ceases to be comic that it's conservative. So it's an interesting, I think it's an interesting question. And I think you're right that it does link directly to this, like, is enjoyment political?
we were just watching a movie the other day, Hell or High Water, and it's set in Texas. I mean, it came out in like 2016, but it's a very kind of red state film in a way, but it's very sympathetic to red state issues or whatever. And there's a relationship between two policemen. One guy's like a Native American, and one guy's a sort of old, on the verge of retirement white guy. And they're, what signifies the fact that they have a close relationship are the really mean jokes that the guy that's just about to retire says to the other one. And the way they work, obviously, is that in the joke you're saying all people are X, all of you people are X. But the reason why it's funny is he's saying, and you're not, you're the exception, right? That's the humor in it is the fact that isn't true. So yeah, I can see in a way, is that what you were saying, that like all...
No.
Are you saying that jokes can get theorized? Jokes are all emancipatory, but they can get theorized in a hierarchy.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think so. I'm trying to think what I think. I don't disagree, obviously, with Alenka and Badiou's kind of reading of that. It's just that I suppose I don't think that they are inherently emancipatory, or that humor is inherently emancipatory. I can see it from the perspective of like the fact that it's sort of universal, I guess. But like it's more like I guess what I think about laughter. I mean, this is not the same as enjoyment necessarily, but I guess I think of laughter as like a kind of moment of change, like event or something, like a kind of mini event, like a micro event. Like this is what I tried to kind of think about, I guess, that like in the Badiouian sense, like each laugh is like a mini event. Now, event can be emancipatory or it can be reactionary. It depends what the context and structure of that is. It's just so that like what I think happens when you laugh is there's a restructuring of the subject, like a miniature one that happens in that moment. And of course, it depends how you then see that. That could be a restructuring of the subject into a fascist subject, or it could be a restructuring of a subject out of a category of fascism, as in Helen's example, like the racist joke can be anti-essentialist, and it sort of breaks you away from your essentialist way of thinking, in which case it's emancipatory. But or it could sort of re-territorialize you into a certain position that could be fascist or racist or anything else. It can do both of those things. A racist joke can release you from racism, or it bring you into it. And I think that anecdotally, the thing inherently emancipatory about laughter or inherently conservative, it comes down to its context, which of those functions it plays.
Yeah, I agree with that. Like, I think that was my point, that I think either your theory is it's inherently one or the other, or it's up for grabs depending on the particular joke, right? Like a joke that's, I think the term that you use is pretty good. Like a joke that's universalist is, I think, emancipatory. And I like Helen's example quite a bit, because those jokes seem like they're particularist and conservative, but they have the effect of forming this bond between them, right? And so I think that it's maybe that in the particular context they work in an emancipatory way. So I think I would just say it's up for grabs, and I think that's true. I mean, that's kind of what I was trying to argue about enjoyment in the book, that it's up for grabs depending on the structure that it takes, or depending on the situation that it's in. And then I was just trying to detail how it works. But I think you're right to say that that's maybe a dicey thing. Certainly, I can think of certain people that would not like that, like Jacques Lacan himself would not like that idea that enjoyment is could be politically divided in that way, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, is there a danger though that, like, I mean, if it's not fully understood in this way, is there a danger that what ends up happening is that some enjoyment gets like sort of partitioned off as acceptable, whereas other enjoyment becomes, is there any enjoyment which is purely...
Well, you get maybe, because you see this often, that this sort of like liberal excusing capitalism, you get this sort of mystification that happens through often like misinterpretations of theoretical ideas that can be rendered into a hierarchy. So it's like, I'm the kind of person who tells the left-wing joke, but in doing that, it's actually a way to to project a promise in the left-wing joke almost, and then to sort of be like, this, if we have the left-wing joke, this is the way to emancipation. And then that's also a way that capitalism might capitalize on that to like mystify. I don't know. But that's only if things are like, this is just the misinterpretation of a theory where, there is always a temptation for people to oversimplify and be like, this is the right way of doing things, this is the wrong way of doing things. When actually the point is that laughter or enjoyment itself overrides this idea of, is it good, is it bad? It is a universal. Because I would say, what is the actual left wing? And you may not. I think you. I mean, I've read too much. Maybe this is what you think. But is the very fact of it, right? The fact, like speech itself, or the humor itself, or enjoyment itself, and then it might be. And again, we see, you have the example in the book of the Stalin Kulak situation, where the left wing becomes right wing when, but actually it's the fact, it's the realization of the fact that we enjoy that is the left wing, has the left wing potential.
Yeah, Helen, that's really great. I love that point. I mean, I think it's exactly what I like how you anticipated what I think, and you were exactly right about what I think. It's really good. Yeah, I think it's right that there's the fact that we enjoy. I think there is a kind of it seems to me like the conservative position, there's an inherent denial of enjoyment, so that even the articulation of enjoyment, and the fact that we enjoy, the fact that enjoyment is determinative, is itself a left-wing project. But I am, though, taken by what you just said about the way in which you could imagine someone using, like, there's a joke in the book, this is my favorite joke of all time, about going to a monastery, right? And you can take that, so I'm not going to retell it because I've told it way too many. It's like Slavoj and that joke about coffee without cream. I've told that joke too many times. But you can imagine someone telling that joke and knowing that it's proper, and thus getting a kind of symbolic currency out of that. And so I think that there is that danger of taking the theory as a way to ensure your position is insulated from criticism. And so I think but see, it seems to me like even though that's the liberal articulating, I think that's a conservative form of enjoyment, right? Because it's defending your particularity and not submitting yourself to the universal. So I think, yeah.
Yeah, but if I think I agree with this, except so just a follow-up question then. If it's the case, I don't know, this is also what you said, Helen, but if it's the case that it's the enjoyment itself which is universal, and I understand it from that perspective, and that would be a nice argument for the importance of psychoanalysis as something which can be a part of a universal project and break across identity categories and other kinds of divides between people, because it points to it seeks for what is universal in subjectivity, whether that might be lack or enjoyment or whatever, and it uses these moments to identify and create a universalist position, which I think is leftist. But therefore, it follows then, if let's say if enjoyment is fundamentally itself universalist, and this is the leftist thing to recognize that, then is the content completely irrelevant when it comes to what we enjoy? And already in this conversation, we've had several examples of jokes where we were using the content of the joke to explain why it might be seen as a leftist or universalist form of enjoyment. But surely if the enjoyment itself is leftist and universalist, the content becomes completely irrelevant. So there is no way of saying X enjoyment is what is bad and Y enjoyment is good, because the content isn't important in that formulation.
Right, I agree. No, I agree, Alfie. But I think I think the way you could say it is that the form, the content, there's indifference to the content politically, but the form it takes is really important. Like if it tries to cut off that universal or deny that universal dimension of enjoyment, then that's what gives it the conservative hue, right? Like but I think you're right to say that it's not you can't just specify a particular content. It's that form of particularization that gives it a conservative hue, whereas the emancipatory or leftist enjoyment accedes to the universal dimension of enjoyment, I think, formally. And I think that's the key. So then that's why, just like Helen's example again, it's a great movie, Hell or High Water, like the way in which that joke can be emancipatory, and also the content of it can be objectionable, right? Like I think that's really important because of the form in which it's delivered is what's crucial.
And the contradiction between those two things, between the form and the content, is really like saying something about the unconscious or humor as such, that things aren't literal. But this always makes me think of, there's an example I think that you see so much in social media, because there's this idea of like lack itself is this universal, and we all lack. And if this says something about, the universal nature of human subjectivity, and then this is political or emancipatory in a certain respect, but we see on social media, like people so much foregrounding lack to mystify, the way that social media works, or to mystify privilege or whatever, or to sell oneself, like lack itself can be sold as a commodity when it's like a particularized lack. So when it's like, oh, because I have this issue, I'm closer to essence in some way. So, it's like all of these things, I think, if they're taken in any way other than the fact that they are a universal feature of subjectivity, they can be commoditized, like in their form, but the fact, like maybe the emancipatory thing about that is not that people are mystifying class privilege or whatever, or mystifying the way that social media works, or even like projecting that they're a divided subject. Like, what gets really confusing is like social media makes you think that everybody's a non-divided subject, but then using like lack to kind of mystify, to act as if it's like, no, I am divided, but you're kind of not. It's really confusing. But the fact is, it's like the dissonance, or the fact of, I don't know.
I think that's
itself, not that to lack, this is not, to foreground lack is a on the hierarchy of things a better thing to do, because that as well can just be a way to mystify.
That's right. No, I think that's absolutely right. And I like how you keep coming back to like this commodification process, the role that capitalism plays, because I think there is a kind of like, there can be a competition to say who's more lacking, right? Like, I think that's what you're talking about. And I think that's a real problem. And that's a way that I'm not on social media, so I feel a little bit weird talking about it. But I think you're right that even lack itself, when performed via social media, can itself seem like a site of abundance, right? Like I think that that's why there's a kind of, and like in a certain way, social media is an envy production machine because of that, because everything that you display, even if it's lack, ends up seeming like abundance and like excess, and I think it's plenitude. And so it's really hard to convey lack. Although, the only thing I would say about it is that the point of lack, right, is that it takes something away from you, not that it gives you something. And I think that's what capital can't appropriate. And so I think I think that's true about great art too. Like the great work of art it's not like it gives you cultural capital. No, it takes a cut out of you. And I think that's a really important, like anti-capitalist way of thinking about lack and also art. I mean, I just think, to me, that's a really crucial thing, not to think that things that we encounter add to us, but that they actually cut into us. That seems like a really
like anti-capitalist, like some of the greatest, performative anti-capitalists might be, the crypto guys or what have you. But, so when we say that, if there's like a utopian edge to what's being offered, even in a theory, then people can kind of misappropriate or whatever. But as you say, the thing is, but that's in order to not foreground that, this is to do the opposite of, as you say, what, a Rothko painting does or something like that.
Right. Like, there's a really easy way to tell, right? Are they getting a lot of money for what they do, or are they not? I think it's not that hard to tell, but yeah, I think you're right. Anything. Yeah, go ahead.
No, go on.
I was just gonna say anything can be anything can be appropriated, right? Like, but I think if a certain theory, like a theory of lack, gets appropriate, you can clearly see the misappropriation, because lack is being turned into its opposite.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's really right. I mean, you can't have a list of lacks. If these are the things I'm lacking, it's precisely in the nature of lack not to be turned into a positive term like that, which you can actually say what it is.
Don't you think? don't you think in this sense, like that the difference between lack and loss is really important, right? Because loss, you've clearly lost something, and lack is just, it's structural, right? Like you're structurally lacking. I mean, I know that you could say I'm lacking this or that, but I think you can also say I'm just a lacking being, whereas loss, I think, implies that you've actually lost something.
Like an absence, because it's like, it's not all of these things when you get these sort of like corporatized social media versions. It's like, if only I was, let's say I have this issue that if only I had access to this, then, and yet I've managed to achieve this without it or whatever. But the lack itself is a feature of humor, is a feature of contradiction. This is coming out in a way that's not just evidenced by not having.
Yeah, I agree with that. So in that sense, your what you just said there, Todd, like your loss and lack is your equivalent of like mourning and melancholia or something like that.
Right. That's nice.
I think that is really important, and I think Helen's point is really important in the context of politics and stuff, and of course, left and right and so on. Because what I think we are seeing, and I think you're both right to be talking about social media as like the platform where this all plays out. But what I think you're seeing is a group, a community which largely associates itself with either liberalism or even the left, which is precisely doing the opposite of recognizing the lacking nature of subjectivity and the divided and contrary nature into a commodity, as you guys were sort of saying. So that seems to me to be what's happening in liberal social media spheres, and it seems really important to point that out in the context of any attempt to say there's a leftist enjoyment, because that would be very much not how leftist enjoyment would want to function. Would that be right?
I absolutely agree with that. Like the predominant liberal mode of enjoyment is not what I would call leftist enjoyment. Absolutely true. And I think, isn't it interesting just in this conversation about lack and loss, is that the liberal position is centered around loss. And we just had an election in the US, and a lot of the discourse was about the loss of the democracy, right? Like that. So on the liberal side, and I mean, the right side is clearly nostalgic for, make America great again. That whole idea, it's so clearly about loss. But even on the left side, it's our democracy's been lost. How do we reclaim it? So I think that you're absolutely right to see this, the liberal position is also caught up in the same logic of loss, and not this embrace of universal lack and a leftist enjoyment that I would want to argue for.
Yeah. No, I think, one thing I was going to ask, but I think you kind of already started asking, it's just how to like situate this theory of enjoyment in and I guess this is you guys were already talking about this with the question of lack and fulfillment and so on, but like how to situate this kind of theory of a universalist enjoyment in relation to like your wider like last 10 years of work or whatever, which is really about capitalism and promise of fulfillment and how desire functions in capitalism and so on. And you yourself said anti-capitalist as an anti-capitalist. You're looking for somehow an anti-capitalist approach to enjoyment that would be universalist and so on. So I know this is probably actually in a way this is the first most basic question. Like, what do we do in this situation where you're in just the way we described online liberal discourse? Our enjoyment has been co-opted to such an extent by a capitalism which functions on the promise of fulfillment and so on. So obviously you're not saying stop buying iPhones and Nike trainers or whatever. So what are you saying we should do with this problem of like the capitalization of enjoyment and so on?
Yeah, I mean, right. I don't think because I think the problem with that kind of idea is that that solution to capitalism is such a liberal individualist response, right? Like you're not seeing the way in which the only response can be collective in some way. But I guess what I'm saying is that capitalism is incompatible with a leftist form of enjoyment. So that capitalism actually needs the identitarian, particularist. I think it ensconces us in our particularity, and I think that's the thing to try to break out of, right? Like to try to find a universalist form of enjoyment, and that's not tied to this particular and exclusive forms that capitalism requires. So that's the whole. I mean, that's the basic thrust of the book, is like to look for try to form even social organizations and look for social forms that aren't particularists, that have an opening. And one of the things I think I find this really interesting is the way in which capitalism is incompatible with the idea of a public. So this assault on the public, any kind of public realm, I think one of the things we can do is try to defend the public sphere at any cost, right? Not in necessarily the Habermasian sense, but just in the sense of like, public places for public debate, public parks, public owned streets, like all these things I think are really important. Public prisons, even. I think these are really important battles to fight. In the US, like almost all the prison system is privately, contracted. And so I think that like if these institutions are schools being, like mandatory public schools, like I would be for doing away with probably private schools. It's like I think to me, those are the ways in which you can be struggling against capital without, obviously, whatever, you shouldn't probably buy a ton of things, but not buying Nike shoes instead. I don't think that's going to make a difference. But I think trying to form public entities it seems like to me a really important thing.
There's so much to do with the public and recognition, and so many of the issues I think today, political issues, are to do with this like sense of an absence of recognition that can only be achieved through in a way addressing your public, as in addressing other people who are also divided, that you do not have dominion over. This sort of retreat into kind of like a solipsistic universe through neoliberalism, and how social media purports to be public, but actually it's just a commoditized public. It's interesting because it's like, I did a session actually a couple of years ago looking at these ideas with GCAS, and there was a sort of conversation about, well, no, today people are, it's all too public, and people are airing their dirty laundry in public, and that's sort of this sort of confessional stuff on social media and stuff. But it's like, no, this is a privatized. This is a decision, a private decision to commoditize something that was culturally private within a sphere that appears to be public, but is actually completely private. And actually, part of the way that psychoanalysis works is this recognition through the eyes of another who is completely out of your dominion, because they also lack and are a speaking subject. So I do think that one of the political aspects that we need to kind of be conscious of today is this idea of the public, but the public as in the universal public that is divided, sharing subjectival division or whatever, and being able to address each other as public beings in a way that I feel like is just sort of lost under the way we do things now.
Absolutely agree. I think that's just really well articulated. I totally agree with that. I think that I love what you said about the way in which you air all your dirty laundry, and it's like everything is too public, but it's like, no, the point is everything is too private, right? Yeah. I think it's so well put. Like it's like we're invaded by the privacy of others, we have no respite within the public sphere. And I really also loved what you said about psychoanalysis as a public, we think no, I'm going into the privacy of the analyst's office. No, it's actually like a public airing. I think it's so important that the analyst isn't your friend, right? Like the analyst, you're not looking at them. You're talking to the public basically. And I think that that's really important, but it's still not this public airing of the private. And I think that it's interesting how proximate psychoanalysis is to social media, and yet how different it is because of the relationship between public and private. I think that's really good. Anyway, I would just say that Joan Kopchak has a really great essay on this I think it's called Locked Room, Lonely Room, and she's talking about film noir, but she makes exactly this point that we've come to a world of universalized privacy that appears like we're too much forced into the public. And I think that would be exactly my position.
I know, because just another thing about jokes and the private imagined public realm that's actually private is, like this couple in Hell or High Water, that one of the ways that we become, we get recognition is through the eyes of another who might think differently to us and is different to us, and we can't control the thoughts of, and therefore they might joke at our expense or have a different vision of something to us, or, you know, like something that's a very big thing in British culture is to like rib your friends, take the piss out of them. And, you know, I don't know if bullying is the right word, but it's a little bit like that. And this actually allows you to be more of a stable, recognized self in the public sphere. And what social media does is, you know, it gets us more and more and more to act like celebrities with a curated interface with the public, which is not, you know, public. And we become more and more and more detached from reality often, which then makes it more and more difficult to engage politically with other people, because there's this total misunderstanding of what recognition is. And recognition isn't like hero worship or something like that. You know, fame doesn't work in terms of recognition. You know, it's only in the eyes of the divided other that we actually get a sense of self.
Yeah,
and the other has to be a subject in order for that.
Yeah, agreed. And I think that it's interesting. I was just thinking of the word publicity when you were talking. Like, in a way, that word is misleading, right? Because it's like it has public in it, but like the publicity of the celebrity isn't really public, right? Like, it's a kind of private, like the celebrity's private life is put out there for people to see. So I think I think that's really important, that this like lack of, and I like this idea of like the ribbing, the difference between the ribbing. What did you call it? Pissing on? I don't know that term, but it's a British.
Is that what it is?
Ribbing, yeah.
Taking the piss out of. Yeah.
This is a British piss. Yeah, and it's
like
very
that.
interesting. I mean, I agree, and I actually do think it's a really great point that you know, this point about that the social media is this has helped me to understand your point, I think, as well, Todd, that, you know, we think this is a public space, but this is a private space, and this is the kind of private space which is incompatible, as you said before, is incompatible with a leftist form of enjoyment. I actually think that, yeah, piss taking and ribbing people in the school playgrounds, in let's say a public space of a sort, or in certain schools anyway, you know, is a kind of leftist enjoyment where you see that you're a divided subject. Now, what happens in the current public private spaces like social media is it's actually impossible to behave like a lacking subject on Facebook.
Yeah,
even if you're even if you're pouring out saying, I'm going crazy, I'm completely unhappy, I'm divided, I'm contradictory, it doesn't actually come across to the other person as if you are contradictory and divided, because structurally the platform doesn't allow for that. And it's not because Facebook curates itself like this, is because it's a private platform that isn't a public space.
But also, I always think about it's like the whole history of screen media and transference, the way we look at movie stars, the mirror stage. Like, as soon as something's on a video, it seems more on a screen, it seems much more whole and complete than it actually is, just to do with the way that we've historically related to screens often.
Right.
So even if someone said, I think like with the problem with trolling and the internet not being a private space and a public space, it's like as soon as something's typed out, it's like the whole history of print media. Like somebody's published this because it's like in black text on a white background, you know, and it's there forever. It's not. It really means that these things take on a power that doesn't relate to that we then like excessively defend ourselves against or what have you. That it's not when it's taking place in a truly public sphere where we recognize each other as lacking subjects. The sting is different.
Yeah. That's why you can tell the racist jokes in that context, but not on Facebook.
Right, not on Facebook. Right. I think that it's interesting to me that the you know, this distinction between bullying and ribbing or piss taking, like, I think that's a really important distinction. And on social media, I think this is what you're saying, all you can do is bully, right? There's the other option isn't even possible because it's this privatized realm. And I really like this idea that it's because there's no way to confront lack in that realm, because I do think there's something to do with the curation of it. Like, if David Lynch curated Facebook, I think it would be, there would be a way that, I don't think it's like necessarily formally impossible. Like, I think there would be maybe a way to structure it where the lack of the subject could become evident, right? Like, I don't think it's necessarily impossible.
No, I was also thinking that I wanted to correct myself there, because I actually think that something like Reddit and even some of the Chan boards like 4chan, which are obviously strongly associated with the right, are much better at presenting their users as divided subjects than your mainstream capitalist platforms like Facebook and Twitter
they're anonymous, right?
They tend to be anonymous.
Which is interesting in terms of like, because the avatar self is not really the same as like, the divided human self. It's
right.
It's very, very different. So in a way, the anonymous becomes more human. Something I was wanting to talk to you about was because you raised this in the interview with Mary about like surplus, well. How this relates to the political economy, because obviously it's like, well, at some stage we have to do something about that, because and obviously these issues of the way that human subjectivity is denatured, unnatural or whatever, leads to issues of surplus value, and then surplus value creates eventually like class issues and stuff. But I can't remember what I was going to ask.
Well, I mean, I was going to ask you to bring this up, because I was also thinking I wasn't going to be able to articulate it right. But I mean, guess what I was thinking about in relation to what Helen was saying is that I think what Mary was saying, if I've understood it right, is that there needs to be a kind of optimism, and it's this promise of fulfillment thing. In a sense, it's good that you are in capitalism, as you've argued in Capitalism and Desire, there's this promise of fulfillment, but recognizing that, right, it doesn't mean you can give up on pursuing fulfillment. You have to somehow kind of disavow it and keep doing things in order to desire, in order to live, in order to be a subject, right? You need to keep trying to address your lack. Otherwise you become that melancholia or whatever, nothing, you can't function. And I think from that perspective, Mary was arguing for like a kind of optimism in this system, where we need to be able to have an optimism to keep going and keep doing this, keep desiring. But on the other hand, I think what we were trying to ask is, doesn't that optimism, that hope, isn't that what produces surplus value?
Yeah, but is surplus value in and of itself the problem, or the disavowal of how human subjectivity and libido relates to the market system?
Because I think it's the latter, right? Yeah. I think it's the latter, right? Because if we translate, like Lacan does in Seminar 16, I think this is maybe his best theoretical move, surplus value to surplus enjoyment, surplus jouissance, then I think it's unavoidable, right? Like, it's not like you can get rid of it. And I think the great move by Marx is Marx doesn't really theorize this, and I don't think Lacan invents this idea and then just kind of lets it go, which is very strange. But I think isn't the great idea that surplus enjoyment is kind of what makes our life worth living. But what we have, but what capitalism does is it like uses that, it strips it away from the person who produces it, and then it uses it it puts it in this fantasy of a surplus without any lack attached to it. And I think that I think the project is to see the way in which lack and surplus are linked together, which is another way of saying like all surplus requires labor, right? Like there's not this pure. I always think of this novel by Ayn Rand, Atlas Shrugged, and I really love it as a capitalist fantasy because they discover this motor invented by this guy named John Galt. It's in some abandoned factory somewhere, and it's basically a perpetual motion machine. And what I find interesting about that is that's the capitalist fantasy. We can have surplus value with no labor, no lack, nothing attached to it. And I think that's what psychoanalysis as a political system or political theory is countering, right? It's saying, no, the point is to see the way in which those two things are married together, right? That every excess is tied to a lack in some way.
Because the thing is, it's like the bad infinite versus the good infinite, or one of the ways that psychoanalysis, one of its achievements is to make you aware of the way in which you enjoy, which is often very disconcerting and very unuseful or whatever. But like it's the uselessness that renders things valuable. But and also, we enjoy in various different ways, and we kind of sacrifice our enjoyment for like a capitalist form of enjoyment, which is very dissatisfying. But I guess this idea of enjoying our enjoyment and how that plays into creating a more, let's say, equitable society through, is this like a philosophically informed political movement that we need? I know that like Pete talks a lot about like this. There's a theological insight that we need like a religious revolution in a sense, because again, this isn't like it's not enough to consciousness raise, about this.
Right. No, I think there's a lot of good points in what you just said. Like, I think that I'm sympathetic to the religious argument. Actually, I think there's something to that, because I do think that there are a lot of people that are committed to a certain kind of social change, and they're in a religious setting, and there's a kind of theoretical lacuna, and so that's there, and a lot of those people are receptive to certain theoretical ideas. I think. But I think that your point, this Hegelian distinction between the infinite of the concept and the bad infinite, I think is really good. Like the bad infinite, and it's associated with capital, right? It just keeps on and on and on, searching for this thing that it never gets to. Whereas the infinite of the notion is this circular, and I think, Alfie, I think what's nice about it is there's still it's an infinite of hope, right? It's not a pessimistic, oh, I'm just stuck in this melancholic repetition. It's no, I find in the repetition, I generate something new. And what I generate new is what's useless. And I think it's really good, this point about the useless, right? Like even within capitalism, I think we only enjoy the useless. And I think that there's this tie between enjoyment and inutility. I think that's really crucial. But capitalism, I think it can't avow that. I think it cannot avow that the surplus value that it creates is all created out of the useless or the inutile, right? Like I think it needs this idea of utility as its alibi, but utility never is. It's like think about the things that we eat, right? That we don't eat the most useful food. We eat the food, like we enjoy the food that's the least useful for us, I think, or the least useful mode of transportation.
I mean, in a sense, it can't avow that, because it would be equivalent to admitting that all of the great products that have been produced in society come despite capitalism, not because of it.
Exactly.
Right. It's amazing, right? All right. That would be it. All the great improvements of our lives are, in a sense, just occurred they're kind of accompanied capitalism. They weren't the drive. Capitalism wasn't the genesis really of them, right?
Yeah.
It's like the fail again and fail better. But I kind of think about this. We're talking about examples of like climate change and the way that we have this kind of green capitalism, this sort of liberal enjoyment related to climate change, and then you've got the conservative enjoyment. I don't know, that's Sarah Palin type. Maybe I can't remember what she said, but she said some stuff.
Drill baby drill, I think it's like, wasn't it? Drill baby.
Yeah.
And there is a lot of enjoyment in this idea of climate change, but like what is maybe the left-wing position is that climate change itself is the obstacle that can create enjoyment. Is to recognize that, rather than this either utilitarian. Well, they're both utilitarian in a way. It's sort of, we're going to exploit nature and we don't believe that there's a side effect anyway. Or it's like, no, we have to kind of weaponize what we, as in we just disavow really how it operates in order to continue on with the system and make sort of personal changes or tweak aesthetics of capitalism in the hope that it's going to sort of fix itself, the climate, but really that there's something in the lack within nature as well that provides a space for enjoyment.
Yeah, it's such an important point. I think that the so many liberal responses, even the most extreme, right, are all focused on refusing to see the lack in the natural world, right? Like the natural world is other to us, and it's other to us. Why? Because it's not lacking, right? And we're this disturbance of the perfect harmony in the natural world. And I think that is the most, in a way, I almost think that position is more dangerous than the Sarah Palin position.
Yeah,
no, I absolutely think it is. I absolutely think it is. And it's the same way where it's like, it's sort of a very white privilege kind of thing, where it's like we this race of people are especially guilty because we are the subjects, and we're in this world. We have, it reads like the Eden myth in a completely different way, instead of I guess Eden, we might say, exists on a pedestal precisely because it's lost, and it's only in that sort of contradiction that is that desires generation or whatever. But it is this sort of absolute. If there's a perfect universe that we happen to be, the guilty party within, I mean, that's very, very religious in a traditional sense, I guess. That this is ordained by some being great. If it's an undivided thing, it hasn't been created by some like Big Bang accident. It's like whole and complete. I mean, it must be by the hand of some god, which
Right. Yeah, that's absolutely true. And isn't it also true that it's theoretically such a naive position? Because if it's working perfectly, how did it manage to create us who screwed it up? Right. So I think that it's not a very sophisticated position, but I think it's politically incredibly popular and dangerous.
And again, this is this really misplaced enjoyment, because it's very enjoyable to be like, oh, I've got to work on myself. As soon as, we will have a great utopian world as long as we recycle, as long as I take this burden on. I mean, that's the enjoyment, right? But actually, the fact is the world is also unnatural itself,
Right.
Yeah, well, I suppose, psychoanalysis, when it works, can counter that politically problematic way of thinking, because it shows you how you're plugged into your environment and your politics at the same time, rather than either of those things being not lacking. Anyway, we should probably let you go, Todd. We've kept you long enough. I just wanted to mention, when you were talking about the Ayn Rand book, we were talking about social media. There's actually a dating site called the Atlasosphere. I don't know if you've heard of this.
I'm going to have to get on that.
Yeah, for fans of precisely that way of thinking. It's crazy stuff.
That's really cool.
Did we get to everything that we were going to talk about?
Do you have something else you want to ask?
I don't know. I feel like maybe you do. I feel like you maybe do.
What do I have to ask?
I don't know. I'm just guessing.
No, but I feel like you probably have to go, Todd.
No, I don't have to go. I mean, you want me to go? That's fine.
No, it's not that. I was aware we were running over the hour. That's all. But was there something I said I was going to ask? I didn't.
We talked about like how psychoanalysis relates to the political right. Yeah. Did we? Yeah. Do you think we did? I feel like we did. I mean,
I probably did have something else. But have you got something that you can remember?
No, but I feel like you maybe haven't asked everything that's.
No, I mean, I was maybe back to where we started about this kind of left and right enjoyment issue. But I mean, I suppose I was kind of thinking that is your book kind of, I don't know, is this a way of bringing back into the fold a lot of the forms of enjoyment which have been, and this, I suppose we did talk about this with the form and content thing, but I suppose for us to put it in like more directly political terms, it's like there's quite a big, for example, things like meme culture and Pepe the Frog and Chan boards, and to a lesser extent video games and some communities around gaming, have become very closely associated with the enjoyment of the right. Whereas and these things, and it's not the same in film probably, but to a lesser extent, I guess. And it's definitely the same. You've seen the pattern in kind of journalism and media. And I suppose I was kind of not hoping, but thinking that this model of leftist enjoyment could be a way of actually building bridges with lots of the community that have become right wing, let's say, and I mean, and of course they are in some ways right wing. But I wonder whether this theory of enjoyment doesn't mean we need to completely reassess all of these lines that have been kind of drawn in the sand about what we enjoy and how we enjoy it, and actually have a much more open mind towards what we have come to think of as the enjoyment of the right. Like I was saying before about how I think 4chan and Reddit have a structurally more, from a psychoanalytic perspective, a more interesting form of enjoyment within their use than Facebook and Twitter do. And I think that's actually quite telling. I wonder whether one of the ways we've gone wrong here is by thinking there is a kind of fascist enjoyment or a rightist enjoyment and so on. And I'm just interested in that, because obviously in your book, you do argue that there is a rightist enjoyment. But on the other hand, your description of rightist enjoyment is much more like what I would have called capitalist enjoyment. Right. And I actually think that in what other people might think of as rightist enjoyment, you might find the germs of leftist enjoyment.
No, so, I don't disagree with that at all. I think that my point is that all enjoyment is of a stripe, right? Like it's all there's just enjoyment, and then how it gets formalized is the key. So I think it's absolutely vital to see within right-wing projects the ways in which they're already partaking of the enjoyment that they may even be attacking, right? Like so I think that's really important. And then if you just change a little bit of that right wing, and that's why I think you're right to say maybe there's potential allies, rather than just saying that my least favorite political event of the last, I don't know, 20 years was Hillary Clinton's statement. They're just a basket of deplorables that we have. You know, like I think that kind of thing is it's such a liberal position, interestingly, but I think it's also such an anti-leftist position, right? Like, because in a way, the leftist position is we're the basket of deplorables, right? Like, so I think I think that there is a way to see that you just a little slight difference in those positions you can see how they can be aligned with a leftist position. I mean, the right-wing position. So if you just a slight shift in them, then you can make the alignment. So I think that I totally agree with what you're saying. Like, I think there's no necessary political edge to enjoyment other than there's something emancipatory about it, right? So even when it gets in this right, it gets directed to the right, there's still a way to bring it back around.
Yeah, because I mean, I suppose to put that question like its recent political context, I think it's not a surprise that the rise of Trump and the rise of Bernie Sanders and Jeremy Corbyn happened at the same time, and I think you can see parallels in the way the enjoyment functions in these cases, even though you might but what has happened, even though from one way of thinking they're opposite forms of enjoyment, but I think maybe in terms of content, but in terms of form, you could see an enjoyment there that was threatening liberal centrism, and there were some shared characteristics on both sides. Now, what the capitalist enjoyment mode, or the liberal mode, or Hillary Clinton's comment has, and the associated liberal centre has been able to do, is keep those things apart in order to regain its kind of control over the ways we enjoy. That would be my view, I think, of where the left is at, and so it would need allies on the other side in order to rebuild itself after this disaster of this kind of recentering that's taken place in the last 2 years.
It's absolutely true. So I live in Vermont, which is the home of Bernie Sanders, and it's very common, not so much in Burlington, which is a kind of leftist part of Vermont, but around the state, it was very common to see a Bernie sign and a Trump sign in the same yard. It was not uncommon at all, which I think just speaks the truth of your point.
Yeah, I feel like that makes sense, and yeah.
But yeah, I guess the part of the liberal issue is the disavowal of enjoyment. You know, at least the thing with the right is that often the traditional right is often right there on the surface. So there's sort of an acknowledgement of, at least, that, it might disavow the fact that it's as a result of an ideology that is absolutist and totalitarian and requires a scapegoat to sustain itself or what have you. But it's still there. But but yeah, often the liberal position completely denies this function as part of human subjectivity at all.
Right. Didn't Goebbels say at least we're interesting? Right. Like, I think there is this kind of, admission of that enjoyment is really crucial to their project. And I think you're right that the liberal position it's the facts that determine things, right? Like, it's that people make their decision based on the facts. I mean, that was one of the things about this most recent election in the US. All the relief of the commentariat about finally America is listening to the facts and not deceived by this emotional appeal anymore. So I think that's really, it's interesting that the hard right, I mean, you can't get more right than Goebbels. Like, there's still a sense of, just as you're saying, Helen, certain things are disavowed, but enjoyment is it's foregrounded.
But yeah, I like the point that you sometimes make about the totalitarian is not total enough. It's like these people, it's explicit, but they haven't gone as far as actually incorporating the total, which involves contradiction and lack, undercuts the whole project of a scapegoat would be required within. Yeah.
Right. That's why Hegel is not a totalitarian, right? Because he's a totalizer. It's an interesting kind of paradox, I think.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, no, I agree with that, and I think it is, and I do agree with the sort of importance of this point from your book, that what we need, we might talk about the liberal, the right, whatever, but whether we call it leftist or not, the position has to be a kind of universalist one that acknowledges that we're all lacking subjects, and we're not seeing that happen at all sufficiently. So that is the challenge, and I think that, rather than being a left versus right wars, which I suppose is not, this is just something we need to do, and it needs to be acknowledged that there's a possibility, and there are like universal dimensions of subjectivity, or there could be in some ways that we could start with, like enjoyment or lack, whatever it might be. I think that is really important.
Yeah.
But and it does make me think, like, okay, yeah, there is a point in psychoanalysis, because sometimes I think, should I carry on with all this? but there is.
I was actually, there's a thing I was thinking of this week of like, but this is again, I mean, this refers back to so much what we were talking about already of this. Like, am I enjoying in the right way? Because the point you make about like, you can tell if a project gets if something gets commoditized, well, is it really left wing? But we still have to sort of find a way to navigate reality and pay our rent and all this kind of stuff, and so. Yeah, it's an interesting kind of predicament, but I guess the predicament is in itself sort of like navigate. I mean, we kind of did this in this movie we did, Making Love, where it's like the it's the enjoying of the enjoyment. That actually the overthrowing of capitalism is not in the overthrowing of capitalism, but in a reorientation towards the dynamics within capitalism, and a philosophical acknowledgement of how we are libidinally invested in capitalism. And this involves, for instance, the way we might sort of like, this is a term that's used all the time, gaslight ourselves into thinking, am I an anti-capitalist subject? Am I like, foregrounding lack in the right way? Am I making a film that's theoretically correct? Whatever, which again is like the very capitalist.
It sort of happens without you, right? It's accidentally, it's the bit that you didn't, that wasn't utilitarian. That's like a kind of utilitarian thinking to be like punishing yourself. Are you doing it for the right reasons? Yeah. No, it's interesting.
I mean, I think disavow is the key term, right? Like that's the thing that you can combat and have to combat within capitalism. And I think that's the thing that, like, the thing that really, I think it almost more today than ever, the fetishistic disavow, commodity fetishism, like these things work. I think those two things work hand in hand, but I think this disavow is really, really essential to how capitalism functions. And so fighting against that is a key.
Yeah.
No, I agree. Anyway, no, let's stop. But it's been really great, and thanks so much for doing it, Todd. I'm sure our listeners and that will be really, really happy as well. Stay there for a minute, and I'll just say goodbye to everyone. But thanks everyone for listening, and see you next week.